Welcome to CIBC Presents Entrepreneurship 101. Got that right. It's my great pleasure today to introduce our guest speaker. But I have just one message from Tony, which is we are on track to select the 12 ventures that will be presenting at the Upstart competition. So as per the original schedule, you will be notified next week about the next steps. So I think Tony feels pretty happy because we had quite a large intake that we managed to get the one-on-one meetings all arranged and so on. So thanks everybody for participating in that. So today is one of our next lived it lectures in the entrepreneurship series. And I have to say you're very fortunate today because you're in for a real treat with Bill Young. So Bill started out, he did his undergraduate degree at the University of Toronto, and then he did a Harvard MBA. He started out as a chartered accountant, which when he starts talking, you will be baffled. Somebody must have told him that was a good idea, but Bill and chartered accountant just doesn't work as two phenotypes that should live together. But after 20 years, very successful career in the information technology space, first with Optel Communications and then with Hamilton Computers, where he was the CEO. As he says, his ship came in, made a lot of money, and instead of doing what a lot of people would do at that point, which is either go to Muskoka or, start another company to make more money, Bill decided to do something totally different. So in 2001, he started Social Capital Partners with a very specific mandate to bring his business expertise to purpose-built social enterprises, which he would build from the ground up, particularly focused on creating employment opportunities for people facing employment barriers. So that was kind of the entrepreneur in him doing it again and again. But more importantly, to develop really a new class of investment capital that would invest in those enterprises in a for-profit revenue-generating model. So he really pioneered two streams. He pioneered these model enterprises across Canada, all very different. So each one of them was really custom designed and custom built and really hard work. But he also implemented a number of strategies around deploying capital to incent people to bring those employees, so-called social hires, into the system. And we're very lucky today because from all those stories, and he'll tell you some of them, Bill learned a number of things, and I think the wonderful thing is he's still not happy that he's made a big enough difference. So he's on the cusp now of really taking all of the learnings, both on the enterprise building side as well as on the financing side, to create a system tipping kind of a focal point innovation around social hiring. And Mars is delighted that we're working with him a little bit on that. And it's a big vision, but I hope he'll share with you a little bit where we hope the Fortune 500 will be on social hires in 10 years' time. So it's a big dream. So, if you will allow me to be shameless, as we've all come off our Olympic highs, and we've had some fun thinking about, what it's like to be a Canadian, and it's more than mitts and funny beavers and closing ceremonies. Bill, to me, is one of those people who really speaks to the best aspirations of Canadians. He's really smart, he's incredibly creative, he's incredibly hardworking. This is hard work. And hugely aspirational. So he speaks to all of those best aspirations of building a sustainable society and bringing all that business discipline in. And on top of that, he's one of the funniest people you'll ever meet. So to me, that is probably the best combination of leadership you can find. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Bill Young.
Thank you.
What a good guy.
Wow, what an introduction. I'm never going to be able to live up to that. So Ilse basically gave my speech. Any questions? I should say, this feels like a second home to me, Mars, these days. I am here a lot, and we do have some big ideas, and this is a good place to come if you have big ideas to get help, and certainly we've been lucky enough to benefit from that. So a real thank you to Ilse and Allison and Tony and the whole team here for kind of what you do in general for the social innovation world, but more particularly the help we've received. And I always start with the same joke, and I looked around, and I don't think there's enough of you that have been to a previous speech of mine that I can't get away with this, because you'll find out I'm a one-trick pony. And fortunately, her memory isn't very good, so she thinks I'm the funniest person she's ever met, but I come up with the same joke every time, and she's delighted by it. But anyway, the joke I always come up with is actually a conversation with my then 5-year-old daughter, who saw me. I was coming down to the breakfast table, and uncharacteristically, like I am now, I was all dressed up. And Sarah looked at me and said, "Daddy, why are you all dressed up?" And I said, "Well, Sarah, it's because I'm giving a speech today." And she said, "Well, Daddy, why do you have to dress up to give a speech?" And I had to think about that for a second. Why do I have to dress up to give a speech? Well, Sarah, it's the polite thing to do, and I think people will pay more attention to me if I'm all dressed up. Well, Sarah had to think about that for a second, and then trying to be very helpful, she said, "Daddy, I think people will pay more attention to you if you're bare naked." So anyway, if I see any of you nodding off, I know exactly what to do. Anyway, so I am going to, in the spirit of Entrepreneurship 101, I come without a speech, I come with a story. And I come with the story of getting Social Capital Partners started and kind of our trials and tribulations in doing that, and our successes and failures, and sort of the evolution of our strategy and vision. And it's been an interesting journey, to say the least, and one that as Ilse has pointed out, we're a long way from finishing. So it's one of those classic, entrepreneurship tales that if you ever knew what you were getting into when you started, you would never, ever have embarked on it. But once you're in it, there's no turning back, and that's kind of, what we're doing. So I'll take you through that. I will be smart enough to take my watch and put it right there, because I'm someone who can get sidetracked on storytelling. And I want to make sure I get through the story. There will be side trips back that I will take if I get through this in time to explain a few more of the things that we've been doing. So anyway, as Ilse said, I'm one of these really lucky people in life whose ship came in. The wheel of fortune has spun incredibly well for me, and we all know that it doesn't spin well for everyone. And I thought, how can I take my business experience and leverage it in a way that does good? That was sort of the challenge that I was thinking of back in 2001 when we started Social Capital Partners. And is there a way to harness market forces to do social good? I mean, that was sort of the challenge to think about. And we started, as Ilse mentioned, with this notion of, well, can we help build and finance and develop social enterprises that are specifically designed around this concept of providing employment opportunity for people who face employment barriers. And our notion was thinking, well, instead of just having to rely on government-funded training programs designed to help people who face employment barriers get the skills to then be able to apply for a job, could we go one step further and actually give them a job and do it in a real business and try and get that business to make money? So at the end of the day, you're coming up with a better social outcome, people with jobs and everything that it means to have a job, and doing it in a model that had no societal costs. So, thinking like the accountant in me, that when I could still call on that, because it is a foreign, distant memory for me, but could we create a better social return on investment, a better numerator, better social outcome with a much better denominator, i.e. no societal cost? And that's what we embarked on in 2001, that notion of doing it. And we were trying to say, okay, how do we get this going? How do we get a deal flow in this? And we we decided to hold a national social enterprise business plan contest where we said, okay, we'll award a $15,000 cash prize to the best business plan we can find around this. But the real prize is that this would not be an academic exercise. If we liked a particular plan, we'd be willing to fund it. And we asked for everything that you would see in a normal business plan. We said, okay, tell us, in the business plan, what your product or service is, who your competition is, who your management team is, give us your 5-year cash flows, tell us about your marketing strategy, etc. And we said, but we want to see your social plan, part of the business plan as well. So who's the target population you're going to hire? Where are you trying to get them to? What skills do they need to get there? How are you going to develop those skills in the context of the business? And how are you going to measure it? How are you going to know that you did it? And of course, we joked subsequently, it's not like we knew how to put together one of these. So we were sort of curious what would come out of it. We were hoping that someone out there would figure it out so that we wouldn't have to. But anyway, we got lots of help from business schools and media, et cetera, and publicized it, and we got over 100 plans. And the winner ended up being these 4 not-for-profit organizations, housing organizations in Winnipeg, that got together and said, we could do a lot more for the people we're trying to help if we were trying to address their employment needs, not just their housing needs. And here we are as 4 not-for-profit housing agencies in Winnipeg. We've gone and acquired a whole bunch of houses in the inner city neighborhoods of Winnipeg for next to nothing. And the reason we've acquired them for next to nothing is they're so run down that they need a huge amount of renovation work just to be brought up to code before we can make them available to the people who qualify for low-income housing. And traditionally, we've gone out to the private sector to do that renovation work. But we never found a reliable source of supply in the private sector because, A, we, the not-for-profit housing agencies, put every single renovation job through a competitive bidding process, and we always take the lowest bidder, so there's not much in it for whoever wins it in the first place. And B, whoever does win the job invariably gets surprises, not the least of which is often their job sites get vandalized and neither they nor their employees want to bid on any of our jobs again. So we go through this constant recycling of different suppliers and we never found a reliable source. And so the eureka moment was, hey, why don't we start up a new kind of renovation company? A renovation company that actually employs the people from the inner city neighborhoods, gives them and teaches them long-term trade skills, gets them involved in the community renewal process because now, if not actually metaphorically, they're going to be working on their neighbor's house. And maybe we can even devolve the ownership to the employees once this gets on stable financial footing. So they put together a business plan around that. It won our business plan competition, and we and another organization in Winnipeg called Community Ownership Solutions provide the startup funding for inner city renovations. Inner city renovations today employs, I think it's 26 people. It's run by a general manager who has plenty of years of business experience. It has 5 grizzled old foremen that serve as job site supervisors, trainers, tough lovers type thing. And most of the rest are urban Aboriginals from the inner city neighborhoods in Winnipeg, whose prospects before they started working at inner city renovations weren't that great, and yet now are, in many cases, in almost all cases, earning a sustainable livelihood and on a much better both career and life path than they would have looked forward to otherwise. More importantly, inner city renovations is also profitable. And I'll come back to that because it did take us a long time to get there. But that gives you an example of kind of what we did in this era. And you'll hear from my story that we've been through phase 3. We're into phase 3, but inner city renovations is a great example of some of the best of the things we were involved with in phase 1. And without going into the details of some of the other organizations from our early phase, I'll just quickly run through them so you get an idea of the types of things we do. We help finance a property management company in Vancouver called Atira Property Management that's owned by a charity that helps women who are victims of violence. Atira Property Management's run by a commercial property manager, has a number of licensed property managers on staff. Right now, does the property management services for dozens of condominium properties, but also 15 of BC Housing's single accommodation residences. It now employs, in total, almost 200 people. A number of those are part-time, so it would be probably about 130 full-time equivalents. It employs a number of the women affiliated with a charity in the admin jobs as their first step back into sort of the mainstream, and a number of men who are residents in the single accommodation residences, often having recovered from a form of chemical dependency, in some of the on-site security maintenance jobs. It's now profitable and growing quickly, and interestingly enough, one of the things that we've been working on is approaching Toronto Community Housing on whether or not property management services could be performed by, Atira in some of the community housing units here. So another interesting story, and all these have interesting stories with them, which I'll keep going as I keep looking at time. We have a bicycle courier company here that we help finance called Turnaround Couriers, so I can put in a plug for them for any of you who are not using their services. Started by a consultant from the Monitor Group, and we have been lucky enough at Social Capital Partners to have the benefit of, since we started, pro bono services from Monitor, which they've been willing to give us case teams to help the businesses we finance be more competitive, or anything we've asked for, they've been terrific in helping us with. But one of their consultants thought, instead of helping you, I'm going to go start one of these myself, and sort of packed in his 6-figure job at Monitor and said, started up Turnaround Couriers. And Turnaround Couriers is a bit of a different model. It's what one would call a transitional employment model, where the real idea, it hires directly from youth shelters, and the real idea is to get the kids back into some form of stable housing and on to the next step in their lives, but in the meantime, teach them basic job retention skills like show up to work on time, be accountable, etc. Thanks to Richard's leadership, Turnaround Couriers is now profitable. Does, for instance, some of his largest customers, the largest law firms in Toronto. Does its biggest customer, for instance, is RBC, where it does more than 100 deliveries a day for RBC. Never lost a package, so any of you looking for courier services or using a more conventional courier service, this is a way of, as with any of our models, the model is about, the value proposition is always meant to be for the consumer. You don't have to give up anything in the way of quality or value in using these services, but you're going to do good at the same time. And we think that's a more compelling value proposition, and Turnaround Couriers is a great example of that. More than 100 kids now, as we say in the pun, cycled through Turnaround Couriers, with more than 80% of those moving on to a successful next stage in their life and being into some form of permanent housing, and often back into an academic stream. And then our last one in that is 9 thrift stores in Montreal called, again, owned by a charity in this case, called Renaissance, operate under the brand of Friperie. They're like Goodwills. They've been a terrific organization. Again, we made a combination of loans and grants in this case to them, and all the loans have been paid back, and this year Renaissance will make more than $1 million of surplus from these businesses. The thrift business, by the way, was one of the few good businesses to have been in last year. So 14% same-store sales growth. There are not many retailers that can claim that, but if you're in the sale of reused clothing and that kind of thing, it was actually a good business for the economy. That gives you an idea of the kinds of things we were doing. I should, often I don't have enough time in these speeches to go through the things that we failed to do well. But one of the examples, again, it's not like we have a flawless track record, but one of the examples that we didn't make work was an organization called Cook Studio in Vancouver. It was a food service provider, a caterer, food service provider, etc. Again, primarily with the hiring at-risk youth in the downtown east side. run by a fellow who was a former executive chef from one of the big hotel chains, thought he wanted to do something different with his life, and he, created this business. Interesting enough, the undoing of this business was landing a huge contract. Sometimes businesses can go bust from too many sales rather than too few, and particularly where you don't have good systems in place. And systems are particularly important in a food service business around making sure you can track where that food is and its spoilage and how much of it's going missing and, all those things. And James was a fabulous person and a wonderful chef, but not as strong a business person. And normally we pride ourselves in being able to help in that area. It's one of the things that we do is try and roll up our sleeves. But in this particular case, again, it's a long story. Rather than keep pouring money into it, we never called our loan. We wouldn't do that. But we felt like it was not going to turn around. That it had grown too far, too fast, beyond its capabilities, and that our attempts to actually make it work with James were not going to be able to turn it around. So. It again is a longer story, but it's one of the hardest things you ever face as a so-called social venture capitalist. Part of our model was to prove that these things could work financially, and part of our model was to say, we are going to prove that we can come up with a value proposition that is about being able to deliver quality and value in a successful way. And we just decided not to put more money into that, and so with lots of notice and but it was a humbling time for us. The good news from this is most of the kids, the contract we were able to give to someone else, and the kids kept their jobs, and so there wasn't much downside from the employment angle, but it was a defeat for us in a very real emotional way too. So something we still remember. Anyway, that sort of represented phase one for us of these purpose-built social enterprises, and we that was our first 5 years. And in many ways, notwithstanding the Cook Studio, the rest of our portfolio have been a tremendous success. And on the one hand, we'd done one of the things that we were really out to prove, which is that you can make these double bottom line companies work. You can make them work from both a financial standpoint. They can be successful businesses, but more importantly, you can make them work from a social standpoint, that they can actually both transform lives, but perhaps more importantly in terms of what we were trying to prove, if you give people a chance who are job ready but face employment barriers for whatever things that they have, something that's happened in their past, they will perform, and they will perform in such a way that they can be very much every bit as productive as employees hired through traditional means. And so a hugely important finding and proof, if you like, from that standpoint. On the other hand, we hadn't done one of the other things we had set out to do, which was change the landscape. Because after 5 years, our organizations were only providing 400 jobs. And we thought, what's 400 jobs in the global scheme of things? It's not much. And all we are really is we're an interesting magazine article. And the reason we're an interesting magazine article is people think what we're doing is still such an anomaly that it makes for a great story. But we're thinking, but we don't want to be a great story. We got into this to change the landscape. We got into this to try and make these hybrid models more the way we as a society think about generating our economic returns, and to think that this could be kind of the more prevalent model, and we weren't doing that. And so we said to ourselves, okay, what do we have to do to change the landscape? And we came to the conclusion we had to do a couple of things if we were going to change the landscape. I'm going to go for a quick sip of water. Said the two things were, one, we got to figure out a way to engage the private sector in what we're doing. Because up until then, we'd been if you like, mining for deal flow in the nonprofit sector, and it was easier to look there because A, everybody gets the social mission. We don't have to explain it, sell it, or relieve their anxiety over it, all of which we do have to do in the private sector. And two, the nonprofit sector loves the idea of a sustainable enterprise, so they're more than happy to put together business plans around this idea. But we found no matter how smart or how hardworking or how entrepreneurial they are, all of which we did find, and as I always point out, we couldn't be prouder than to be associated with the organizations we're associated with from this phase. But no matter how smart or how hardworking or how entrepreneurial they are, at the end of the day, they don't have the business background, they didn't have the Rolodex, and they didn't have the financing capabilities to actually take the businesses to scale. So those were a lot of the things that we had to get involved with and provide. The trouble is when we found, we found we could only do one deal a year because we'd have to get so involved in sort of the way the business was working. And inner city renovations is a perfect example of that, where in inner city renovations, after the first year, we were losing a lot more money than any of us planned. And as a matter of fact, we were losing money on every single job. So we pointed out, growth is not necessarily the answer when you're losing money on every single job. We got to figure out why we're losing money on every single job. We got to break down every single job into its component parts and have a budget for drywall framing, compare actuals to budgets, figure out what's going on. Anyway, guess who it is who builds the project management system, and guess who it is who's on the phone saying how much you spend on drywall at 310 Selkirk Avenue, and you realize we're never going to scale this. Even if we can get this turned around, we've got to find a different approach. And that led us, kind of the second conclusion was, we've got to find a way to make this more cookie cutter, because startups are hard anyway, and startups are arguably even harder with this model, where you're trying to implement a different kind of business model. And we found we're spending so much time on trying to get the business to work, we can't do more than one deal a year, and we're going to have a hard time scaling the ones that we do. So is there a way, private sector cookie cutter, what's that lead us to? Well, it led us to thinking about, well, what about franchising? Why don't we go to a number of franchisors, established franchisors, with this value proposition? We'd provide subordinate debt financing to an entrepreneur who wanted to own a franchise of an established franchisor. And we'd provide attractive financing. We make it subordinate to any bank debt they had. It'd be kind of the money they'd normally get from friends and family. But our conditions would look a bit different than a bank's. So our conditions would mean they would have to hire, to get our money, they'd have to agree to hire a certain percentage of their employees through community service agencies who help people who face employment barriers. But our covenant back to that entrepreneur in our value proposition is we would get them a job-ready pool of candidates to choose from. And if we did not deliver on that covenant, they did not have to deliver on their covenant to us. And we said they would be the sole judge of that. All that they would have to do is make enough attempts that they could make that judgment fairly. And so that was the value proposition we went out with to franchise, with the idea of good. We won't have to figure out the business model. We'll just have to figure out how to get a job-ready pool of candidates to the people who run these franchises. Anyway, we approached a number of franchisors. Most said, they didn't say it this directly, but effectively they said politely, we don't want to be your guinea pigs for this. This sounds like a great idea, but where's your proven model? But we found this one organization called Active Green and Ross, which is a car service company that has 80 outlets or store locations in southern Ontario, that are owned by an Italian immigrant who thinks he lucked out in coming to Canada, thought a lot of people helped him along the way, and thought, well, this is an interesting way to give back. And he said, okay, tell you what, let's do a pilot in Hamilton. And so what we do is we go into a place like Hamilton, we say, okay, who are the best community service agencies here? Who are the ones that can we got to treat the business as the customer, not the individual that they're trying to employ. But our job is to figure out what makes for a successful entry-level employee at Active Green Ross. What are the characteristics that lead to success in that particular type of company and that particular type of job, which is normally a lube tech or sort of the entry-level job. And then we have to marry the pool of candidates. We have to figure out which are the best ones in the pool of candidates and marry those, the best to the active green Ross. So not send everyone out spaghetti at the wall. Send the ones that have the best chance of meeting the criteria that makes for a successful entry-level employee. So we go into Hamilton, we figure out the best, a couple of community service agents, get that, we facilitate that process. From this, 5 hires came, they all worked out, they said, let's do another. And now we're up to 23 active green and Ross locations where we are providing the financing for the entrepreneur in return for them using our social hiring program. More importantly, we've now got our proven model. So we now have Mr. Lube, Nurse Next Door, and We Care all have agreed to run a pilot, and then if it works, take it across their network. So, and the beauty of it is, we don't have to, unlike in the other business where we had to drop everything we were doing to try and figure out how the business worked, we don't have to figure out the price of an oil change, or we don't have to figure out what should be the gross margin on the sale of a winter tire. All we got to figure out is how do we get a job-ready pool of candidates to that entrepreneur. So that model is working, and that was what we thought was the idea. And if I have time, I'll come back to, how those pilots sometimes, we've got 3 more pilots. It's tough to get the first one to work. Once you get the first one, and that's why we love the franchise model, it's much easier to get, the others to work, which is the beauty of the Active Green and Ross one now. I should also say some of the criteria we look for in financing is or in the type of franchise we partner with, there's a whole bunch of criteria, but perhaps the most important is a career path. And one of the things we like about Active Green and Ross is you don't need that many skills to change oil. Although, as I joke, it immediately eliminates me from contention. But you can work your way to being a licensed mechanic. So it's got this great career path where someone who wants to stick to it and keep going can earn a sustainable livelihood and really look forward to a successful economic future. So, but anyway, we thought that was the idea, that we'd get hundreds of franchise, thousands of jobs, we'd engage the private sector, we'd make the cookie cutter, and as I joke, it's the only thing we've ever done that's more or less going the way we planned it, and we're so stunned by that, because nothing else ever has, that we think, great, that's the idea, and we'll continue this. But a couple things happened along the way that made us realize, well, that's not the big idea. And this is what's led us to phase 3. And again, none of these phases are totally at the exclusion of the other ones. But a couple things happened. One was Active Green Ross came to us and said, okay, we want to use your social hiring program in our company-owned stores. We don't need your financing. We thought, well, that's interesting. We thought we needed the financing as sort of the carrot and stick to make this happen. We offer the carrot of attractive financing, but we got the stick of, we'll call your loan if you don't do this. And they said, no, you found us access to a labor pool we would never have had access to before. They're working out, and it's the right thing to do for the community. Why wouldn't we do it? We thought, good question. Why wouldn't you do it? And then another franchisor, a service master, who came to us and said, we'll do a pilot. So they're another potential for that. We've got those 3 that we have agreed to do a pilot. Service master is another one, although we aren't working with them directly right now since we've got our hands full with the 3 we do. But they came to us with saying, we'll do a pilot with you, and introduced us to the fellow who had their Scarborough territory and wanted to take, who had their Oshawa territory, wanted to take on their Scarborough territory, need financing. And we said to them, well, don't sign up with us right away. Work with us for a month. Make sure this is the right thing for you. And in Scarborough, we work with the Y, so we still did that, helped them with hires, et cetera. And a month later, he comes back to us and says, well, actually, I'm not going to sign up with you. He said, the bank that's financing me in Oshawa is more than happy to finance me in Scarborough. And it seems to the loan documents, and your interest rates aren't that much better. And, it's actually just, it's pain-free to deal with them. He said, but thanks to your introduction and facilitation, I'm going to keep using the Y. He said, before I put an ad in the paper, I got these 85 responses. Now I get 5 pre-qualified candidates. I pick the one that I want. And if there are any issues with them, I refer them to the job coach at the Y, and they refer them to, they might be English as a second language or a financial literacy program or whatever they need to be more effective employees. And we said, wait a sec, and that's when a light bulb went on for us. And we said, wait a sec, this idea isn't about hundreds of franchises and thousands of jobs. This idea is about changing the way the HR function works in companies that have lots of entry-level employees. Because right now, those companies don't think they can invest in their entry-level employees. They'll invest in their senior management, they'll invest in their middle management, but they're not going to give more than a half day of on-the-job training to their entry-level employees because they turn over so fast. And the reason they turn over so fast, they don't have the support infrastructure the rest of us take for granted. And naturally, the first day they get a sick child or something like that, it starts this cycle of I'm not coming to work, this, oh, I'm not a reliable employee, because they have no other place to get the support, et cetera. And naturally, the companies say to themselves, well, even if I realize that, we can't afford to put those support mechanisms in place. But what they don't realize is those support mechanisms exist out in the community. But the dots aren't being connected. And there's a whole bunch of reasons why those dots aren't getting connected. And that too is a long discussion. But part of it is that community service agencies are really good at getting people to job ready. They're not as good at the placement side of things. And part of the reason they're not as good at the placement side of things is not just because they don't come from a business background, but frankly, the incentives that are put in place, the financial incentives, encourage them to think that this is a transaction business as opposed to a strategic relationship with a customer, with an employer. And they think their customer is the individual they're trying to employ, not the business where that person could be employed. And all that begins to add up to saying, wait a sec, we began to look as we were looking at this, we speak the language of business, we can see some of the reasons why these dots aren't getting connected. We're not under the kind of critical pressure that the community service agencies are, where they're funded as soon as they place someone, so they naturally they want to send someone spaghetti at the wall out to every placement opportunity to try and get them placed as fast as possible so they can get the fee, so they can meet payroll. We get that this is a longer-term strategic relationship that has to be matched. And we're mulling this over when we're at a call at Canadian Tire, trying to get them interested in the franchise side of things, but also meet the senior person on the distribution side of the business. And we say to them, we take them through the story. We take them through the Active Green and Raw saying, we're going to use this in our company-owned stores. The guy saying, I'm not using you, but I'm using the Y, the connect the dots theory. And at the end of it, he says to us, well, we employ 4,000 people at our 2 distribution centers here in Brampton. We get this community engagement stuff at Canadian Tire. It's in our DNA. We support all kinds of charities in Brampton. We get involved in the community. He said, it never occurred to me to think about this through an employment lens. This makes so much sense. And it was almost as if he wanted to say, so when do we get going? And of course, we're thinking to ourselves, well, we know how to find 4 people for our Active Green and Ross franchisee in Brampton. We don't have a clue how to find 4,000. But we began to say, whoa, this is a real opportunity for us to try and figure out. So we knocked on the doors of Monitor, which is what we do anytime we've got an idea that's way bigger than we can handle and we need some resources to help us try and figure it out. And we said, Monitor, help us try and figure this out. Help us figure out the demand side. How do companies hire their entry-level employees now? What do the economics of that look like? How satisfied are they with us? Help us figure out the supply side. What is the job-ready total of single moms, new immigrants, at-risk youth, people with physical or mental disabilities? And what is that job-ready pool size? What's our value proposition in this? Who do we partner with? And by the way, what should this look like 10 years from now? Because if you look at the way product gets to market now, product gets to market through 1,200 fragmented community service agencies that we think in many cases don't have the right incentives in place, none of whom, even if they were great at the job placement function and had the right incentives in place, would be of a size to service Canadian Tire's needs. What should this look like 10 years from now? What should the systemic change be? And again, Monitor went away, did the study, said, we think your hypothesis is right. We think, for a whole bunch of reasons, this makes sense. And so with their help, and now with Mars's help, and a whole bunch of other people's help, we put together we're embarking on this business plan, what we call the Change HR business plan. And it's a 10-year vision. And we think it'll take us 10 years to do this. But our vision is that 10 years from now, every single financial post or Fortune 500 company will have a social hiring program integrated in the way they do their HR function. It'll be something they have to report on just as a normal sort of CSR reporting. We think that the delivery mechanism for this, and all this is a vision now, this will all change as we get more into it, but we think the delivery mechanism for this probably won't be, for the placement side, won't be necessarily community service agencies, and won't be some hybrid social capital partners put together around this notion. It will actually be the delivery engines that are placing hundreds of thousands and millions of people globally in these entry-level jobs. It'll be the Workopolises, Monsters, Randstads, Adecos, all these organizations that right now aren't part of that loop but have the whole value chain in place. We think companies will be paying for this service because we will have cracked the code on what we call now, this is where you begin to realize we're working with consultants, the HR technology algorithm. We will have cracked that code, whereby we will be able to have demonstrated that the employment outcomes of people hired through this channel are as good or better as the employment outcomes hired through traditional channels. And we think it's cracking that code that is actually going to be the key to scaling this and changing this systemically. It means for the first 3 or 4 years, our plan is to say, okay, let's social capital partners be the startup cost absorber in this, where we say, and let's try and land 3 large pilot customers that have sophisticated HR systems. Because even though we know, for instance, in Active Green and Ross, what's happened with every one of the 146 employees that have been hired through our social hiring channel, we know if they're when they got hired, we know if they're still in place, we know if they've been promoted, we know if they left, why they left, whether it was for a good or a bad reason, and we're tracking those outcomes. It's not like Active Green and Ross actually has a control group that we can compare it to. And so the whole idea with these pilot customers that we're landing is to get them to buy into this idea and this vision, and mutually to design these pilot programs where they can hire a bunch through their traditional channels, a bunch through this social hiring channel, and we work with our community service agency partners to keep tweaking the pre-employment support and post-employment support until such time as the employment outcomes hired through this channel are as good or better as the employment outcomes hired through traditional channels. Then we'll have good data for the funding to community service agencies to link the kind of pre-employment and post-employment support to employment outcomes, so that and undoubtedly we'll end up segmenting that by youth at risk, by new immigrants, by single moms, by people with physical or mental disabilities, and et cetera. But there will be data that shows what works for what, and the funding is on that. But now companies will be able to pay for that, and with companies, because they're getting employment outcomes and they pay for every other recruiting service that they have, so why wouldn't they if the recruiting service was getting them employment outcomes that were as good or better as their own ones? And that makes it a possibility for other organizations to develop a profitable practice around this that already have the value chains in place to service those large customers. We plan to engage and are engaging the 4 critical actors in this whole thing from an early stage. So conversations have begun, and we've shared a lot of the research that both from Monitor and other sources around this with employers, with community service agencies, with the government, and with recruiting companies. And again, I look at the time, and surprise, surprise, I talk longer than I ever think I'm going to. The reactions have been good around those, and I probably won't go into those details. More just to start to pause here, I thought I would tell you about some other things that, but I probably shouldn't, about how we finance and how we use, in our financing, we structure our loans so that instead of the interest rates being linked to something like prime or the way any other financial institution would do it, we link it to the number of social hires, so the interest rates come down as the number of social hires go up, and so we link the economic returns to the social mission type thing. But I won't tell you about all that. I'll wait and see if you've got any questions on that. But you get an idea of once you get into something like this, there's no stopping. The ideas get bigger, and you're sort of stunned by, thinking, oh, how are we going to pull this off as a size organization? But again, you figure out the levers of help in organizations like Monitor and Mars, et cetera, that can help and have been such a tremendous help in ours. But I think I'll pause there, even though I left out things like Fresh Start, which I wanted to tell you about, which one of our other really exciting failures, and some other things. But I better leave enough time for questions. So, questions. I'll stop there.
Hi there. Where do the small startups fit into your Change HR business plan, or do they?
Probably don't in this early stage, because we need big enough pilot sort of hiring opportunities and big enough data points and sophisticated enough HR systems to get the data that we think is really, really important. We think the data is crucial to both cracking the code to know what works and what doesn't, but more importantly, the data is going to be critical to scaling. We have to have data that shows that the employment outcomes are as good or better. And in small organizations, there isn't enough sort of control group, if you like, on that. So we hope by osmosis this will work there. But again, because it's a lot of upfront work on our part too, we've got to find big enough pools to do that. So sadly, that's where it happens. Although we're always willing to, any small organizations out there that just want maybe to phone us up and say, could you just give us some insight on who good community service agencies would be to work with in our area? That's the sort of thing we can help with, because we've done a lot of the due diligence there and say, these ones are employer friendly and get that you're the customer, and that can help too. And that's the kind of thing we'd be happy to do.
Hi. So given all your wonderful successes and, well, failures, I wouldn't say wonderful, right? I guess just wanted to know, when you look at a business case, what sort of things are you actually looking for in terms of success features, and how does that differ from, say, a traditional business case in terms of the metrics and the figures that you're looking for?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and that is part of what I wanted to get into, in my notion that, I'll just talk for 15 minutes, then I'll be able to add all these things in, of course, 35 minutes later. But metrics are, and the metrics are different for each of our phases, interestingly enough. So in phase one, for every organization we worked with, with them, did a social return on investment report. It would have been a before and after kind of socioeconomic profile. And by that I mean it would be, look at all the people that have been hired, what their socioeconomic status was before they were hired, and what that was potentially costing society. So if they were on social assistance, what did that cost? If they were in a youth shelter, what did that cost? If they were, well, there's a whole bunch of things. So it was the before, and then the after would be after 2 years of employment. What were they sort of giving back in the way of taxes or whatever? What was that net change? What investment did that require, so that it could be compared to other models, if you like, of attempts to help that structural social challenge of finding meaningful employment opportunities for people who face employment barriers. It's different a little bit now that we've got into the private sector, as opposed to these purpose-built. So much is around thinking through, we won't do anything unless we see, so we won't work with a company or we won't work with a franchise system unless it meets certain criteria around the job quality aspect and the career opportunities. So we haven't been aggressive, for instance, in fast food in the franchise side of things, which is a natural place to go because there's so many franchises. But it's the career path that we've struggled with there. So there's an entry-level bar, if you like, in the way we evaluate in that phase. And then a lot of it then is tracking sort of the employment outcomes and the career progression, because we want to make sure, and that's more about saying, are we giving the right pre-employment support and post-employment support with the community service agent we're partnering with to help the people succeed at these jobs and to find employers good employees. And that will become even more important, that aspect, in this phase 3 of Change HR. So it could be a lot longer answer than that, but hopefully that gives you an idea of the things that we are looking for. I should say in that first phase too, we were absolutely looking for businesses that could succeed financially. So we look at the same kind of criteria that an investor might, from a traditional, investment lens. And on the franchise side, we wouldn't, we look for financially stable franchises that have a very good track record with their franchisees, if you like, with the owners of the franchises. And again, in Change HR, we are looking for companies that have a great track record around CSR and that kind of thing, that have showed an interest and a willingness to try and figure out how to be better community actors, if you like, because they'll be the ones that have a natural bias to making the kind of investment to make this work.
Bill, first off, I just want to say you're a very engaging speaker. And taking into account your daughter's advice, I think that's a good thing. So thank you for that. I just wanted to ask you, I'm starting up a business venture, basically trying to do a similar thing overseas and trying to create opportunities for some friends that I met while volunteering there. And basically business and employment and entrepreneurship opportunities. I was wondering if you guys do support that or have ever thought about getting involved with that stuff.
We don't. I mean, and mainly because it's not that we wouldn't want to. And it's where we're grateful that organizations like Mars have started up that are providing some of those things too, which is not a way of deflecting you to Mars and saying, oh boy, that was a good move. Look at that, Ilse. I've just passed it on here. And Ilse and Allison should know that's one of the tricks that I've used several times up here where I've ended up saying, oh, we're not the perfect order, but just go to Mars. But we recognize that's an important need, that service, et cetera. We've got too much to do right now. And so our focus is on saying, I love the Michael Porter line when he says, you've got a strategy where when you say no to great opportunities. I think it's a great opportunity, but we'd say no to it. And it's because we know what we're trying to do and what where our focus has to be to do it well. And in the context of our resources, we can't do everything. So that's kind of. But there are organizations springing up that are explicitly around trying to help the incubation side of people who have these ideas and are helping. So I bet you that is a question, kidding aside, that Mars could maybe give you some thoughts and ideas around.
Okay, perfect. And one quick question also is there a place where we can find where these services, like the type of services that are social hires, so like a website someone can go to, a company can go to and find out?
For explicitly around finding social hires? Or
yeah, exactly.
I don't know, would you say anything, Karim, in the back of the room on that? As Karim, way back there, works with me and is and probably thought he was going to get off easy on this, so.
Well, there's a bunch of websites, 211, a really good resource for lists all the community agencies that provide employment services. And there are a bunch of associations that also provide active information.
All right, thanks, Bill. Thanks, Karim.
Thank you. Some of the people that are working in the field of social finance and the double bottom line feel quite strongly that in order to be successful in the longer term, that we need a different tax structure or some sort of tax incentives that would help make this work. What are your thoughts? Does government need to support this in a different way?
I have to be very careful because I'm videotaped right now. Sometimes I go off on my... we need a much better enabling environment. Again, it's nice. Tim Draymond, who's not very far from you, in fact, sitting right beside you, is working on some initiatives around this. The government is, to their credit, much more interested in this. Right? There's real sort of progress, I think, happening around this. We are behind other jurisdictions like the U.S. and the U.K. in terms of creating an enabling environment for these sort of hybrid structures. The UK in particular, I think, has thought through this well, so I think there's a good blueprint out there, and there are ideas now in motion that I think will result in some real positive change there. And that was very well done by me. That was a very diplomatic, no emotion. Look at that. I'm very proud of myself. But the good news is it really is happening, and it's wonderful for those of us who've been in the field for a while to see that now.
I was wondering if, for the people that actually got hired in your programs, were there any issues with those people later on at all or not?
Certainly, it's not like a flawless track record, just as there isn't a flawless track record with hires, any of us being hired. So again, it gets back to, this data that we need to collect. We need to actually understand how the social hiring employment outcomes compare to hiring through traditional channels, because otherwise this is going to remain just or put another way, if we have to rely on companies just doing this out of the goodness of their heart, it's not going to end up reaching scale. So I think, to your question, one of the things that we think is most important is we have to prove that, and we have to prove it against hires through other channels and compare the results through this channel to really, really understand that. We do as I was saying, with someone like Active Green or us, we can tell you what's happened with the 146 employees, including a number of those that haven't worked out and that didn't have what we call unsuccessful outcomes, where they were fired, and they may have been fired for things like not showing up, or so it's not like we have an unblemished track record around that, but we know that no entry-level hiring, there's no company out there that has an unblemished track record, and we really have to establish the track record vis-a-vis those. So, and it's a little bit different than in our, one of the things we admit in this is people have to understand that we're helping the job-ready segment of disadvantaged populations. There still needs to be a lot of work done to get people to job-ready. The community service agents play a hugely vital role in that, and will need to continue to play an incredibly vital role around that. But again, particularly if we're going to get the private sector to buy into this, it's the job-ready portion of disadvantage. The people who've worked hard to overcome their employment barriers, that have been helped by the pre-employment support that the community service agencies have provided, but now need someone to give them the chance. And that's the population that this model is designed to help improve. So I hope that answered your question.
I thought your remarks were just inspirational today. So excuse me if I ask a bit of a devil's advocate question, which is, it occurred to me towards the end when you were talking about phase 3, that if you're completely successful here, you create sort of a paradox whereby someone who is unemployed, someone who's seeking entry-level work and has not been associated with community services organizations could be at a disadvantage. Not today, not tomorrow, but eventually, if you're successful, that paradox could occur.
Yeah. No, it's a great question. And incumbent in our belief is a rising tide raises all ships. We don't believe in the zero-sum game mentality, that we don't believe that there's only X number of jobs, so you fill it with someone, you knock someone out, then they become disadvantaged and you don't change the pool. And I think all the work around sort of early childhood and getting people to, through education and to graduate and to give them skills, the better the skills development, the better the economy, the more opportunities, the more the rising tide raises all ships. Undoubtedly, there'll be some of what you said. It's not like, again, it's completely a rising tide raises all ships, just as it's not completely a zero-sum game. But our belief is it's more the rising tide raises all ships. And anything that effectively invests and builds skills and skills training and provides opportunities and provides someone the opportunity to develop their skills is going to be a net gain, both for that individual, but for society as a whole. So it doesn't have to come at the expense of other individuals. But certainly, that would be some data that it would be helpful to have and prove as well.
Thank you, Bill, for doing all this stuff for community. And my question is I think the discrimination won't ever stop, different kind of levels, which I also experienced. And let's say in manufacturing sector, I never seen a person in wheelchairs working on assembly line, okay? So I think it would be maybe more wise to put some political pressure a little bit on these bigger organizations, right? Or hiring relatives, and then the entry-level employee has no chance to grow. Or I never seen an immigrant as a CEO or something like that. So what would you do to improve this kind of stuff?
Well, I hope what we're doing and what these initiatives do is, try and undo the systemic issues that, do get in the way of, people who do face employment barriers, like new immigrants having the same opportunities as people who don't. And it won't happen overnight, but I think it will happen. And I think I'm encouraged by, the attitudes of a lot of the employers who, but we have to make this easier for the employers to do it as well. And that's where the link to finding, allowing immigrants or people with physical disabilities to find, both the right community service agencies to, get them to job ready, and then the right employers to hire, and then the data that shows that actually, those hires are performing every bit as well or better than traditional hires, starts to change the way the thinking is done and starts to change the system and the way the system works and all those things. But it will take time. We are probably, overly optimistic in terms of thinking about it in a 10-year time frame. But we know it's not a 1 or 2 year time frame either, because we acknowledge, some of what you're talking about is going to take a time to change, and it's going to take, it's going to take systemic changes with multiple actors, and that is always the toughest sort of change work to do. So I would give you a hopeful response, but one that's, that acknowledges that it won't happen tomorrow.
Thank you.
Stay here.
So just for your information, we will, if you watch on the Mars blog on this particular event, we'll make sure to put some of the links into 211 and some of the other resources. And just so that everybody knows, 211 was started as a social enterprise by Ellison Hewitt, our own Mars social innovation wizard. I also, on the issue of legislative change, we've just done I think a very useful piece of work. It's hot off the press in paper, but it's also available electronically on some of these emerging blended structures, and it is a changing landscape, so watch for more updates in the future, but I think there's a good baseline piece there, and Alison probably has some hard copies she's happy to share with you, but we'll also make sure you get the link to that piece, and it's part of a series on social enterprises, so for those of you who are interested in those themes, there's some great resources available, and I think one of the things our social innovation group has done a very nice job is to link to some of the other great stuff that's out there, so it's a useful portal to go through. I think I get everybody's support to, first of all, thank Bill. Thank you for the enormous work you do. Thank you for inspiring us today, and I think you'll all agree with me, we need more Bill Youngs in the world. Thank you very much, guys.